In ancient times, between towering mountains and vast lands fragrant with the scent of pomegranates and olives, there was a village called the Green Valley. In that village lived a young man named Khaled, an orphan. His mother had passed away at his birth, so he was raised by his father, a man known for his generosity and patience and whom all the villagers loved. But fate was not kind to Khaled. A year after his father's death from a chronic illness, misfortunes began to pile up on him. Khaled was a young man in his 20s, with a brown complexion, black hair, and a slender body, but he was strong-willed. He lived in a house he inherited from his father, a small house with 2 rooms and a small courtyard surrounded by a small garden with an old fig tree. He was working the land and selling his crops in the village market. But the greed of relatives played a part in his tragedy. His father had a brother named Salem, a cunning and stingy man who was never satisfied with what he owned. When his father died, Salem went to the judge with forged documents proving that Khaled had no right to the inheritance and that the house and land belonged to him. On a cloudy, moody day, after the judge had issued his ruling, Salem came with some men and they evicted Khaled from his home. Khaled stood looking at the house and the garden, his eyes filled with tears and his heart breaking from the pain. Ooh. He couldn't believe that he would be deprived of everything he loved. He walked to the village road carrying an old bread pan, 1 garment, and a few coins. The villagers watched him from a distance. Some sympathized with him while others were silent, fearing Salem and his influence. Khaled walked on his feet as the sun began to set, asking himself, "Is injustice this great? I'm deprived of my home and my money, and I'm expelled as if I were a stranger. Ooh." But he didn't fall and didn't surrender to despair. He decided to leave, to start from scratch, and to return one day to prove to all of them that justice could not be defeated forever. And so, Khaled's footsteps moved away from his village, his mind filled with dreams and plans, and his heart with a fire fueled by his desire for revenge and to return one day, but in a way no one expected. Khaled walked in the desert alone under a scorching sun, with sweat dripping from his forehead. He carried a small bag with a piece of old bread, a few coins, and a heart full of anger and pain. He remembered the face of his uncle Salem as he expelled him, and the sound of the men mocking him. So he tightened his grip on the bag and swore to himself, "By God, I will return one day and show them who Khaled bin Rashid is." After walking for long hours on a bright moonlit night, Khaled sat under a lone latte tree on the caravan route. Silence surrounded the place, except for the whisper of the wind. As he was getting ready to sleep, he heard footsteps approaching. He jumped to his feet, his eyes scanning the darkness. Suddenly, from the shadows, a strange man emerged wearing a black turban and a veil covering most of his face, with only 2 sharp eyes shining in the dark. The man asked him in a mysterious tone, "What is a young man doing here alone? Don't you know that the night in the desert is dangerous?" Khaled was flustered but composed himself and said, "I'm a wanderer thinking about what's to come. Are you a thief?" The man chuckled lightly and said, "No, I am like you, a victim of injustice." The man sat near Khaled and started talking. Khaled told him his whole story and how his money and home were taken from him. The man listened with interest, then said, "Listen, I know a place where if you go and work hard, you will become rich, and I don't want anything from you except that you remember me if you ever become something." Khaled's eyes widened in astonishment. "Ooh." And he asked, cautiously, "And what is this place?" The man leaned in and whispered in his ear, "The desert hides great secrets, Khaled, and I will guide you to them, but you must be brave and persistent." They spent the night together, and in the morning the man got up and gave Khaled an old map and said to him, "This will lead you to a hidden treasure. Go and trust yourself." In a moment, the man had vanished into thin air, and Khaled was left alone, looking at the map and wondering, is this really my chance or is it a new trick? Uh-oh. With a pounding heart and a rekindled determination, Khaled decided to follow the map and not return to the village until he was a man who had changed his own destiny. The sun rose over the desert, and the sky was a clear blue as Khaled walked, with the old map in his hand. Every time he stopped, he would rub his eyes and try to understand the confused symbols drawn on it. At the beginning of the journey, he found himself in narrow passages between high rocks, where the shadows kissed the ground, and the wind whistled with sounds like the whispers of ancestors. Every step he took made his heart beat faster. He didn't know if he would find a treasure or a grave. After hours, in the middle of the day, he saw a small oasis in the distance, with palm trees and an old well. He rushed towards it, his throat burning from thirst. When he arrived, he pulled the bucket and drank greedily until he was sated, and rested under the shade of the palm tree. As he was sitting, he noticed a movement in the sand. He jumped to his feet and grabbed a stick he had picked up on the way. Suddenly, another man emerged from the branches, with a dark complexion, a thick beard, and a sharp look in his eyes. The man said in a harsh voice, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Khaled gathered his courage and said, "A traveler looking for my fortune." The man laughed and said, "Fortune in this land? Fortune belongs to whoever takes it by force." With a quick movement, he lunged at Khaled, trying to snatch the map. The struggle was fierce. They pushed each other in the sand, and Khaled hit the man on the shoulder with his stick. He groaned and backed away. Khaled was breathing heavily, his heart beating like war drums. Suddenly, the man stopped and said while holding his wound, "Okay, you're brave. Few can withstand me. I'll give you a piece of information, then leave me be." He caught his breath, then whispered, "Behind the great rock there is a hidden passage that will lead you to the treasure, but beware of the traps, for many have disappeared there." Khaled looked at him suspiciously and said, "So you're not the only one who knows the secret of the map?" The man smiled sarcastically and said, "In this desert, secrets are like the wind. They slip between your fingers." Khaled left him and walked, thinking about his words. A little later, he stood before a great rock that looked like a mountain. He walked around it, and with a careful eye, he noticed a narrow crack. He entered cautiously. The passage was narrow and dark, and the sound of his footsteps made a terrifying echo. As he was moving forward, the ground shifted under his foot, and he fell into a pit. He tumbled onto the sand, and when he stopped, he found himself in a dark cave, with a great stone door in front of him, inscribed with old Arabic script, "Courage opens doors." Khaled took a deep breath and said to himself, "This is the beginning of the real adventure. Oh boy." Khaled stood before the cave door, staring at the great rocks that covered the entrance like a mighty guardian. He took the map from his pocket and looked at it closely. The symbols pointed to pushing a small rock in the right corner. He advanced cautiously and placed his hand on the rock, then pushed it gently. The place shook, and he heard the sound of stones grinding. Suddenly the door opened, revealing a dark and cold interior. Khaled took out the oil lamp and lit it, then took his first steps inside the cave. The air was heavy, and the smell of mold inhabited every corner. The walls were decorated with ancient inscriptions depicting battles, kings, and human fears. He checked the map again. The arrow pointed to a narrow passage on the right. He moved forward cautiously, lighting his way and listening to every sound. The sound of water dripping, the echo of his footsteps, and the fluttering of bats above his head all made his heart beat faster. Suddenly he stopped, for in front of him was a large pit of unknown depth. He checked the map and found a symbol that referred to an old tree trunk, extended like a bridge over the pit. He looked around and indeed found the trunk lying on the ground. He gathered some stones, tied them with a rope he had, and carefully lowered them into the pit. With a trembling heart, he took steps on it until he crossed to the other side. He reached a wide room in the middle of which was a huge lion statue. He looked at the map and found ancient words warning that whoever does not turn the lion towards the east will be devoured. He advanced and turned the statue carefully. He heard the sound of a hidden wall opening. Khaled entered, and with astonished eyes, he saw the treasure room. Wow. The room shimmered with gold, sapphires, coral, and ancient spells. Khaled approached, touching everything with his hands, a gleam of victory and wonder in his eyes. As he was gathering his treasures, he heard a hidden voice in the darkness. "O stranger, are you ready to pay the price?" Khaled froze in his place, sweat dripping from his forehead. Was it the price that the old man who gave him the map had warned him about? As soon as Khaled put his foot in the hall of the treasure, he felt a tremor run through the walls as if the place had felt his touch. He looked around cautiously, a glint of joy and fear in his eyes. In front of him were piles of gold, silver, and jewels shimmering under the light of the small oil lamp he was carrying. He advanced slowly, knelt, and began to collect the precious pieces in the cloth bag that accompanied him. Suddenly, he heard the sound of stones crumbling and falling, so he raised his head in terror. Did I awaken something? I must hurry. Oh no. He took what he could carry and put the map in front of him. He began to walk according to the symbols and lines, comparing what he saw in reality to what was on the map, until he reached a narrow passage. As he was passing, a small arrow shot from the wall, so he quickly ducked on his stomach. The arrow almost hit his chest. He took a deep breath and said, "What are these traps? What is this madness?" Phew. He continued crawling carefully, and every time he entered a new passage, new traps appeared. A moving floor, a high rock rolling down, or sounds breaking in the wall. After what seemed like an hour of jumping, escaping, and crawling, he saw a faint light in the distance. That was the exit. He ran towards the light, and in the last moment, the ceiling closed behind him, almost trapping him inside, but he got out quickly and fell to the ground outside under the starlight. He lay for some time, catching his breath, his heart beating like war drums. Khaled whispered, looking at the sky, "I survived. Finally, I survived. Yay." He got up and inspected his bag full of gold. It was very heavy, and his eyes gleamed with joy and longing. "With this treasure, I will become richer than all of them. I will return to my village and reclaim my home and land that my uncle Salem, my father's brother, took from me." His features hardened, and he felt stronger. This journey would have a meaning not just for wealth but for justice as well. And so Khaled moved slowly in the desert night, with the moon lighting his way, determined to return, his eyes gleaming with the light of righteous revenge. In the heart of the desert, where the sand stretched for vast distances, lay that small village that had witnessed a subtle change since Khaled's departure. The mud houses were clustered together, and the sounds of the wind carrying the scent of the past flowed between the small alleys. But something was different in that village now, for the atmosphere was no longer what it had been. In Uncle Salem's house, his men and the leaders of neighboring villages sat, watching the wealth that this tyrannical man had amassed. He thought that controlling his deceased brother's property had brought him security and power, but in reality, he was building a fragile empire based on the pain of others. Salem, in his luxurious robe and shiny suit, sat on a small divan decorated with fine furniture, exchanging conversations with a senior merchant who had come to visit the village. Salem boasted, "What Khaled never had is mine now. I let him go on his way, and it's time for me to realize my dreams. What these merchants need will be in my sea. It is my destiny, and they know well that I have great power for anyone who opposes them. Mwahaha." But in those moments, the farmers in the village began to realize the bitter truth. It was not as it had been before, where the farmers lived a peaceful life. The land enriched them and sufficed them. But after Salem took control of Khaled's lands, he began to burden them with heavy taxes and press on them. He forced them to work without pay and manipulated the village markets to force them to sell their crops at low prices. As Salem continued his conversation with the merchant, a servant entered the council carrying confusing news. The servant trembled. My master, I heard something strange. People in the village are talking about news. They say Khaled has returned." Salem stopped talking for a moment, his eyes darting between the merchant and the servant who stood trembling before him. Surprise appeared in his eyes, but he quickly regained control of his emotions. "Salem," with a nervous sigh, "what are you saying? How can that be? I expelled him from our lives and took everything that belonged to him. His matter is finished." The servant anxiously, "They say he found something in the desert, a very valuable thing. He is not as he was, my master. He looks strong now." Salem stood up, his eyes widening with concern, his hands moving nervously. He decided to deal with this news with great caution, for if they say Khaled has returned, it means a gap has been created in the heart of Master Salem. In the adjacent alley, where women were exchanging conversations, an elderly woman sat on the threshold of her home, looking at the sky and at the distant mountain that held Khaled's secret. The old woman, with a long sigh, "I dream. If only he would return." He was a kind-hearted young man, but his uncle came on a dark night and left with what was not his right. Sometimes I feel a bitterness in my heart. That discussion between the women expressed the feelings of loss that everyone still felt. Khaled was for them a symbol of the innocence they had lost when greed swept over them. Nevertheless, they hoped for his return and for him to set things right. The news spread quickly throughout the village, and some began to wonder if this news was true. Had Khaled returned to take revenge? Had he returned to take back what was taken from him? In those moments, everyone was in a state of anticipation. As the sky lit up with the stars of the night, Salem's eyes were fixed on the darkness, wondering, will Khaled return to claim his right, or will I be able to eliminate him forever?